Hi, I'm Connor Jones.
I'm Micah Tomasella.
And this is Culture Brief, a Dennis-informed podcast where we are navigating the constant stream of top stories in news, politics, sports, pop culture, and technology. And we're doing it all from a Christian perspective. Micah, we got a show that is loaded today. You're back. We're all back. We're back to normal here. Welcome back, Micah.
Back to normal. I'm back. I might be recording from a hotel room because, contrary to popular belief, Connor and I both have jobs that require a lot of us just outside of recording a fun podcast each week. But I am back, and I'm excited to be back. Plus, we have a big announcement to make at the end of the show of just an extra iteration of the podcast and some additional things that we're going to be doing. But today, we're going to talk about rare earth minerals and lessening our dependence on China for that. We're just going to talk about what rare earth minerals are and why it's important. And then Connor is going to cover what happened at the Louvre and the heist that took place that's almost like out of a movie. It's just absolutely insane. The intricacy disappearing without a trace. So Connor's going to break that down. On top of all of that, we're going to have stories about the government shutdown entering its fourth week, no King's protest, Trump tells Zelensky no, and so much more. So let's jump into the brief.
The brief.
All right. So as I mentioned, rare earth minerals and depending less on China with Micah is what I'm calling this segment.
This like you feel like a professor, and this is like your lecture for the day. This sounds like a science corner.
I did something similar with tariffs and just different things because I just feel like we hear rare earth minerals a lot, and so I just kind of dove in, and I'm like, well, I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about, so I'm just going to explain it pretty much plain as day, why it's important, what it is comprised of, and China, their part to play in it, and how the U.S. is trying to make some shifts and some moves that we're not so dependent on China for those things in the future. So this fall, something big happened that most Americans probably missed. Not oil, not semiconductors, rare earth minerals, Connor Jones. The quiet backbone of everything modern is what they call rare earth minerals. It is the quiet backbone of pretty much everything made in modern day. Your phone, your car, even the fighter jets that defend the country all depend on these 17 elements that are buried deep in the earth. And right now, almost all of them come from one place and one place only, Connor. I'll let you guess.
China?
Ding, 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 ding. The question is simple, Connor. Can America build the future without depending on its rivals to power it? That's kind of the moves that are being making now. And that's just what's so interesting about this economy and world that we live in, is that countries that we would consider at the very best adversarial depend on each other mightily. We depend on China, and China depends on us, right? So Connor, how much in your spare time do you focus on rare earth minerals?
Probably less than 0.1%. It's not something I give lots of credence or time to. I guess
not
when
zero.
I'm reading a story.
But not zero.
Not zero, mostly because I'll be reading headlines. I'm like, tell me more about this cobalt shortage that we're having. So I a little bit, but not much.
Yeah. So let me just give some historical context and just some numbers behind this. So rare earth elements, or REEs, aren't actually rare, okay? They're scattered across the planet, but refining them into a usable form is expensive, toxic, and complex. So that's why China stepped in a long, long time ago, decades ago. While the U.S. scaled back in rare earth minerals, specifically the process of, actually refining it, like I said, it's expensive, toxic, and complex, China invested. So today, it controls about 90% of the world's refining capacity for these minerals. Everything from, neodymium and dysprosium to terbium and yttrium. There you go. These elements are the foundation for the magnets inside electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, smartphones, missile guidance systems, and even MRI scanners. I mean, these things are very important. If you want something lightweight, efficient, and high-tech, you need rare earths, right? So when one country dominates that much of the supply chain, it's not just an economic issue, it's a national security issue.
Well, this is the same argument you can make with like chips in Taiwan, right? Taiwan makes the majority of semiconductor chips. Now, I know what you're saying is that these minerals are what allow Taiwan to actually make those chips.
That's right.
But when there's one country that really controls the supply,
correct,
that's their leverage.
Correct. It's kind of like American consumerism. I mean, we drive the world economy with how much we buy and how much we import. So China depends on us to buy all of their cheap stuff, basically, right? And so in the same way, a lot of countries, including America, depend on China to produce cheap products for cheap, and that's because they can employ children over there and, pay them nothing, right? They have very little to no labor laws. They exploit their people in order to produce these types of things. And so it's just an entirely different landscape. So there's just so much history that goes into all of this. But yeah, Connor, that's a good comparison.
And I would guess they're exploiting their people and labor to pull these rare earths out of the earth, right? Like in these mining facilities and whatnot. I do not imagine it's a safe environment.
No. So let's talk about this Australia deal that kind of was official on Monday, October 20th. So on October 20th, the United States and Australia signed a major framework called the Critical Minerals and Rare Earths Supply Agreement. So it's designed to build a parallel supply chain that doesn't run through Beijing anymore. So here are the facts of it. The deal outlines an $8.5 billion pipeline of joint investments to mine, process, and refine rare earths and related minerals. Both governments, Australia and the U.S., committed at least $1 billion each over the next 6 months to fast-track these projects that are already in the works. The framework includes measures like price floor protections to counter China's practice of flooding markets with cheap supply to kill competition. One flagship project is Alcoa's new gallium plant in Western Australia, a key metal used in semiconductors and defense systems. So it's part of a broader United States allied push to make sure the materials behind the clean energy transition and modern defense technology come from friendly soil, right? So it's not like all of this stuff is going to necessarily happen in America. There is going to be some of that. It's going to be ramped up. And there's some companies stepping up to make more investments here in the U.S. that I'm going to get into here in a little bit. But if you do something joint with a country like Australia, which is a friendly nation, then you work together. And then eventually the goal would be is that you wouldn't be dependent upon China, who, again, has a monopoly on it, having 90% of it. You can create this joint venture that allows you to actually acquire those rare earths that are so important for so much modern technology. But, one thing that I kind of mentioned there was what China has done in the past is anybody who tries to pop up and tries to refine their own rare earths, China's just like, we can do it cheaper. We can do it faster. We don't care about the ecological impact, the natural impact of it, right? So it is a very toxic thing. It's very messy. It's a large project. And so China has just stepped in and squashed any competition because they can do it cheaper than anybody else, right? But this deal signals a really good step moving forward that the U.S. and allied nations don't have to depend on China for something as important as rare earths.
Yeah, so, it makes sense. Both countries benefit here, the U.S. and Australia.
Right.
Helping an ally. They're helping an ally. They're both going to financially benefit.
I think it's great.
Long-term benefits.
I think it's absolutely great. And, it's in the news this week. It was kind of a slower news week, but this is really important. Doing this right now sets us up to potentially not be dependent on China in the future. So even though it's going to take some time, even though it's going to take some investment, even though we might not get there until 10, 20 years, that doesn't mean you don't start preparing now. You don't start taking those steps now. I think it is an important move, and I think it's a good move by Trump. All right. So here's some other deals in U.S. company investments real quick that I'm going to hit. So the Australia deal isn't the only move. There's a wave of activity right now that shows how serious this strategy has become, specifically in America. MP Materials Corp., which operates the only large-scale rare earth mine in the U.S. at Mountain Pass, California, received about $400 million from the Pentagon to expand its processing and magnet manufacturing capacity at home. Apple jumped in with a $500 million deal. In Greenland, Critical Metals Corporation signed a 10-year agreement to ship heavy rare earth concentrate to U.S.-funded processing facilities in Louisiana. Lynas Rare Earths, Australia's biggest rare earth producer, partnered with Novion Magnetics, which is a Texas-based firm. So each of these deals is a small piece of a much larger puzzle, building a global network of mines, refineries, and magnet plants that bypass Chinese control. So what's interesting is you have the government getting involved, but you also have the free market. You have large organizations and corporations here in the U.S. who are jumping in unprompted, investing a ton, billions, into this, right? Which is actually kind of great because it's good for these companies, but it's also good for America too. And so it's cool that there's like this natural simpatico thing happening where the government's investing in it, but so also are these large corporations and companies. All right, so here's why it matters. Here's why it's at stake as I wrap up. For decades, America outsourced this process because it was cheaper and cleaner to let somebody else handle it, right? China was the one handling it. But that someone else built a monopoly and is now using it strategically. So there's a lot of arguments with China right now. Trump gets mad at Xi gets mad at Trump because they're going to cut off the rare earths. And so it's just this back and forth. Whenever China gets upset, they can just threaten it. And they know they can because they control 90% of it. So China recently tightened, like I said, export controls again, requiring special licenses even for magnets containing trace Chinese origin materials. So that's leverage. It means if relations sour, they can just choke it off. And so the race isn't just economic, it's strategic. It's about whether America can keep building the technologies of the future without relying on a country that could just pull the plug, and a country specifically that we don't have much trust or much of a good relationship with in China. So at stake is more than access to minerals. It's control over the materials that power everything that modern life depends on. So a decade from now, whoever controls these minerals is going to hold enormous leverage over global manufacturing, green energy policy, and military readiness. The U.S. and its allies are seemingly like they're finally doing something. They're pulling their head out of the sand, but the race is far from over, and there's a lot of ground to make up.
Yep.
All right, so let me give a spiritual application and challenge from this, and it kind of hit me upside the head. It was kind of obvious. You're over here thinking like, how on earth can this concept apply to my spiritual life? I'm going to tell you, and I think you're going to see how it makes a lot of sense to you too. So there's a bigger picture here than just rare earth minerals. It's about planning for the future. Sometimes Christians hear that word and think it means a lack of faith, as if trusting God means we shouldn't plan ahead. But Scripture, I believe, tells a different story. Planning is not the opposite of faith. Having a plan, storing things away for the future, that's not necessarily the opposite of faith. In fact, I don't think it is at all. Planning is an expression of our faith. So Proverbs 21:5 says this, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes into poverty." Proverbs 6:6-8 points to the ant who prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. And then Luke 14:28 reminds us of this, words of Jesus, "Which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost?" So wise planning is not about control or fear. It's actually about stewardship. God provides for the present, but he also calls us to be faithful for the future. Just as America is working to secure what it needs to sustain its people tomorrow, the future, believers are called to build their lives on wisdom today, trusting God for the outcome. So here's the challenge. Plan, but plan with faith, not fear. Prepare for tomorrow, but depend on God today, because real stewardship doesn't replace trust in God. Real stewardship actually reflects trust in God.
Yeah, that's good. I think, you're talking about, there's this warning that Christians put out, like planning is bad or whatnot sometimes. I think that can be misconstrued. I think typically it's a reference to the verses, that say, you don't know what tomorrow brings, when Jesus is kind of warning about, you could try to predict the end times, or you can try to think about where your life will lead or whatnot. But really, we just don't fully know what tomorrow brings. That doesn't mean don't plan for things. You're going to make a routine. You're going to think about your schedule.
Right.
You probably, everybody listening to this in some form or fashion has a savings account or a retirement account, right? You're planning for that, right?
If you don't, you should.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that for sure. Anyways, all that to say, you're right, Micah. I think it's smart for these countries to be planning ahead. I think it's smart for us in faith to be planning ahead in certain ways and being wary of that, recognizing we are not promised tomorrow.
Right.
We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We could be thrown a total curveball or whatnot, and we're not promised tomorrow. And so that's where salvation comes into play. Like, if you're not saved, make sure you are. We've talked about that plenty of times here, as well as salvation in Christ and whatnot. But great application, Micah. Thank you for taking us through your little science corner of rare earth minerals.
Let's go.
I loved when you were trying to say some of those mineral names. I was like reading the Bible names that you just can't read. You have to pause for a second. You're like,
right.
Honestly.
I mean, you'd think I'd practice them beforehand, but I just think it's all fun for us to go through the experience together. We're real people, with real stuff going on, and so I didn't I didn't go through and practice all of it before, but that just means that we get to go through the process together.
You know it. Okay, guys, let's talk about the big thing that happened in France this week. And no, I'm not talking about like the 5th prime minister in the last 6 months or whatever it is that they're doing over there. They've got their own political turmoil in France. No, I'm talking about this heist at the Louvre. The Louvre, however you want to say it. I know the French have a very particular way of saying that word.
The Louvre?
The Louvre. You know,
the Louvre. The Louvre.
I can't do it. I'm just going to say the Louvre.
The Louvre? The Louvre.
It is spelt like Louvre, but Louvre, I think, is the right way to say it as an American. That's how I know it. Yeah, this heist that happened, if you have not heard, I'm going to detail it, but I'm just going to preface it. You kind of already said it, Micah, at the beginning of this podcast. It feels like something straight out of a Hollywood script. I mean, these guys came, grabbed, and went, and they did it fast. So, yeah, what happened and what was stolen? Essentially, these 4 dudes, maybe there might be a female involved as well, but they're calling 4 masked thieves. They arrived at the south side of the Louvre on Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m., which is already kind of interesting because normally you would think of a heist happening in the middle of the night, or at least when the museum is closed. No, this museum had been open for 30 minutes already. And they showed up, they pulled up a truck with a ladder on the back that kind of like one of those motorized ladders, almost like in America, it'd be like a cherry picker, but these are small trucks they have over there in Europe that do work on older buildings. They show up in this truck, 2 of them go up the ladder, and they bring out a disc cutter and they cut through a window, smash that window through. They get into the second floor exhibit where all these jewels are not stashed, but they're on display. There are literally people, patrons, looking at things because the museum is open. They are out there doing a normal...
Open for business, plain as day. Right. Just the
insane.
last thing you'd expect. Yeah.
Quite literally, yeah. Can you imagine just you're in like the most famous art museum in the world, one of the most secure in the world. You just look over and these dudes are smashing a window and then they're smashing the glass to grab these jewels and go. By the way, they were wearing like construction outfits, so they kind of blended in down on the street. They had these like neon vests on. They looked like they were just workers. They pull up in this work truck. I think that's part of why they got away with this, right? Anyways, they got in, they stole the jewels that they wanted, and they made out, and they got out in 8 minutes. 9:30 a.m. to 9:38 a.m. They were in and out with these priceless jewels. I say priceless. That's what a lot of people have been saying. A prosecutor in Paris did come out today and say that they believe the value will be around 88 million euros, aka $100 million worth in jewels, based off of how they could sell this. We'll just see what happens with that. Anyways, what they stole was a royal sapphire necklace, a royal emerald necklace that contained 1,138 diamonds and was gifted by Napoleon to his second wife, Marie-Louise of Austria, and a diadem worn by Empress Eugenie, I think is how you say it, who was the wife of Napoleon III. As they were running out, they did drop a gold crown that was also worn by Eugenie. And yeah, man,
you're taking something from Empress Eugenie? That's too far. That's just, that's crossing a line.
You're making a joke, and I agree with you, but the French people actually do. They're the ones who are like, that is too far, you know?
I know.
They're not happy about it.
Yeah.
But they did drop this crown on the way out, so they left a little bit behind. They also tried to set the truck on fire. They failed to do so, and that was known because the police arrived, and they found that crown on the ground. They found the fuel that they were planning to douse the truck with, but they got away on motorbikes. So the 4 of them came, got, and went on these little motorbikes, and nobody knows who they are. They were masked, and they got totally away with it. Obviously, this has outraged French leaders. Some have called it a national humiliation, a national embarrassment, a tragedy. Yeah, man, it's hard. You know, the French people, they really like their art and culture and prized possessions of the past, and that's just part of their culture. So something like this hits them hard. And yeah, they're not happy about it. They see it as a national embarrassment.
Yeah, man, I just don't think the French can catch a break. You know, they tend to be the butt of every joke when you're talking about any kind of world war or anything like that. They're very passionate, romantic people who love the arts and love this history, and I think that's great. Just everything I've seen on this story is like every heist movie I've ever seen. I mean, from dressing up in costume to cutting the glass seemingly with some precision to getting away on motorbikes. I mean, it just, every part of this is just, It's like they watched one of the famous heist movies and said, let's give it a shot. And it seemed like it worked.
They probably watched quite a few of those heist movies, and they probably scoped out this floor so many times. Game planning, everything. They knew the alarms were going to go off, and the alarms did go off. That did alert the police, obviously. The police just, by the time they got there, they were already gone. And then all the guards within the museum, their actual first job, I was reading about this, is to evacuate the patrons. So their first job is not to run to find whatever is being stolen. They're supposed to protect the safety of everyone in the building. That makes sense. But what that does is it opens up the opportunity. And that's what these guys knew. They probably game planned every second down to how much time it was going to take to get into the building, grab the things, get back out of the building and onto those bikes and gone down the street. Yeah, it's straight out of a heist movie. And if you watch a heist movie, which, there's plenty of them out there, they game plan every single second. And you have to be so ahead of whatever could be in your way.
You have to practice too. They probably were practicing somewhere. Exactly how they were going to do this. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I was reading this art recovery expert. He works in the British government and his focus is literally on art crimes. His name's Arthur Brand. First off, he called this whole thing a national disaster for France, which I just keep piling on, right? But anyways, he talked about all the implications of what this means, how they could have pulled this off. But really, he talked about why they would go for jewels instead of art. Because when you think of the Louvre, you probably think mostly of paintings and sculptures. Obviously, we think of the Mona Lisa.
Right.
That's the big one there.
I do.
You would think that they'd go for the heavy hitters in the art pieces, right? But really, what he was saying, what so many of these other experts have been saying is, jewels are easier to grab. They're smaller, so you can just grab and go. And then two, man, you can dismantle the diamonds, and then you can melt down the metals, the gold and the silver that they're all set in. And basically, you've got a gold bar and a silver bar, and then these diamonds you can go sell in multiple places, and it can't be traced back to this one jewel. Essentially. Wow. So that's likely what is going to happen with these jewels, unless they can be found ASAP.
Yeah, I was wondering how they were going to sell these, with this being such a big story, if they were just going to sell them as is, that's probably how they would get caught. But then you just said that they could melt them down.
That's why you would do this.
Which makes sense.
If you steal a piece of art, you either have to have a black market buyer, you gotta know somebody who's willing to buy this totally off market that won't turn you in and all of that. Or you steal jewels and you break them down and melt them down, and then you can sell them to many different people, and you may never be traced back, especially if you go somewhere else in the world and sell them. And now, if you're in France, I don't suggest they go to a jeweler in France, who's like, this kind of looks like the same color as the one that was stolen from the Louvre. But anyways, right now, officials are just trying to figure out who this was. They kind of are pinpointing specific gangs that they think could be behind this, that they know have stolen jewels in the past and resell them. They're also zeroing in on the museum's alarm system and just all the safety stuff. Vernon Rapley, he's a museum security consultant. He noted that the thieves simply just outsmarted the museum's safeguards, including by carrying out this operation in the daylight, right? He said that criminals have tended to attack at night, believing that that's when security is at its weakest. Instead, these Sunday robbers escaped into morning traffic, and in the daylight, you can disappear a lot easier than if you do it at 4:30 a.m. You just look like someone else in the street, especially when you're dressed as construction workers. So that was just a smart move on their part. Not trying to give them too much credence. I don't want to celebrate anything like that, but it just, they were thinking ahead, right? Yeah. Anyways, Micah, we've talked about movies a little bit. I thought this was just interesting. The New York Times, I went over there today to see what their latest on this whole thing was. And the first article on their homepage was 6 heist movies you should watch this week. And I was like, wow. They're going to capitalize on this. I think a lot of people are. A lot of people are thinking about heist movies through this, as we already have. I mean, do you have a favorite heist movie?
Probably just one of the Ocean's movies. I mean, those are classics. Ocean's 8, maybe. Those are fantastic movies. I think The Flyover is a news publication that we've mentioned before. They say, let's cruise the news and land the facts. They just give you the news straight up. I really enjoy reading that every morning. But they always have a poll question to their readers. And, that was their biggest story that they covered. And the poll question was, what's your favorite heist movie, right? I mean, this is just eliciting the same response from anybody who's kind of looking at this. I mean, even the concept of disappearing into the crowd after you're being chased. It's a movie.
Yeah. Everyone's like, this is straight out of a script, right? Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't like Ocean's 8. That was the one that was came out, I don't know, less than 10 years ago. They kind of just spin off. I love Ocean's 11 though, where they take over
that's a great
heist, the casino. My favorite heist movie was probably National Treasure.
Oh,
it's also a treasure
that's
movie,
a good,
but dude,
that's a
when
heist
Nicolas
movie.
Cage looks over and he's like, we're going to steal the Declaration of Independence.
Amen.
I get goosebumps.
Amen.
I'm not going to lie. Have since I was a kid. Anyways.
You get goosebumps when he says that? When Nick Cage says that? You get goosebumps?
Yeah, dude. When he's like, we're going to steal the Declaration of Independence. I'm like, let's go. Let's get it. Let's take it.
Yeah, let's see how this works out. Go, Nick.
All that to say, this is obviously, it's an unfortunate event. I do hope the jewels are returned and that justice is brought up, about upon these thieves. But, Micah, this whole thing had me kind of thinking, because we're sitting here joking about it a little bit, laughing about it. I think a lot of people are. They're kind of like, wow, this is just crazy. This never happens type of thing. At the end of the day, these kinds of stories, they're just interesting to me because a lot of us do make jokes or crack jokes online, make memes out of the whole thing, related to Hollywood productions, all of that. When I think about like what separates a story that can do that and what doesn't, it's obviously just comes down to no human was harmed here. There was no
a victimless crime in that way.
Kind of a victimless crime. The victim is an institution, maybe a national pride, right? And obviously there's a financial implication to it. The Louvre, this stinks for them, stinks for their whole staff and everybody involved and all that. The whole thing's not fun. But yeah, there's no real victim. Not even the jewels belong to people who lived hundreds of years ago, right? So this is not something that deeply impacts a human today. I know there are people who have headaches and there are heartaches over this in a way, but it's just different. And so when something like this happens, it's always just a more relaxed response from the world. And I honestly, I believe it's because people inherently recognize, maybe they don't think about it a ton, but there's just an inherent recognition within each of us that there's a true value of humanity and life. And that, God tells us we are all made in his image. In Genesis 1:27. King David, we've all heard this verse a lot, especially if you are kind of in the pro-life crowd. In Psalm 139, he said, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made."
Amen.
And I just honestly, I just believe that as much as the world tries to sell that deception that humans are an accident or that we don't have that much purpose outside of like our monetary value or our status or whatnot, I just don't think that's the case. I think people recognize there is so much value to human life. I wish they would recognize it more and that we would not see so much evil and death and destruction and that there would be no abortion, but that there would be no murder, all of that, right? But if there were human victims in this story, everyone would treat it totally different and with far more weight. But because there wasn't, it lands totally different. I'm just saying, sometimes the news and the public's reaction to headlines actually kind of gives a little nod to the reality that we have a loving God who cares far more about his children than priceless jewels or crowns and that have no eternal value. Those jewels and crowns don't have eternal value. He cares, God does, about a different crown, right? James 1:12 lays it out for us. "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him." We know there's crown jewels and eternal life and all of that, and we talk about that a lot. And when a Christian does pass away, you read, "Go wear your crown of jewels now. You've done your job, good and faithful servant," right? So just a lot there. All that to say, this is an interesting story. We kind of have fun with it, but I think there's a reason we have fun with it. I would just say, as you read headlines, think about that there's ways we see, even in the news, that people inherently recognize there's value to human life.
Amen. Yeah. It's a good point, Connor.
Appreciate that. All of that is just a wrap-up of some of the bigger headlines this week, but let's jump into a few other things here. We'll hit on check-in and tune-in in a second. But I want to jump into the mailbag real fast because we got some responses to the hot take that Alex gave last week, which, by the way, thank you to Alex for jumping on last week with me.
She did a great job, Alex. Thank you.
That was a fun episode. If you have not listened, I would suggest going to listen to that. But Alex did bring a hot take. We like it when we have co-hosts come on. We ask them to bring a hot take for us. She brought the hot take that audiobooks should count as reading. Like if you've listened to a book through your headphones or whatnot, did you actually read the book? She says yes. And we got some responses to that. I also posted a poll on our Instagram page.
What did you say?
The results. I kind of lean towards no. I lean to like I listen to podcasts. That doesn't mean I read a podcast type of vibe. I get that it's different though.
There are no written podcasts.
That's correct.
Alex is 100% in the right.
Okay.
If listening to audiobooks is not reading a book, I rarely read books. I consume a lot of my books through audio because I'm an auditory learner. And so it hasn't even dawned on me that this is a debate. Of course it's reading a book, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's definitely your opinion. I don't think I fully agree, but then again, I've just never engaged in an audiobook. Here's what the people said. Thank you to everybody who reached back out. On Instagram, on the poll, 56% of people agree with you, Micah, and agree with Alex that it does count as reading. 44% said no, it's not reading a book. So it's almost even there. I mean, that's, we're close to 50-50 tie, but technically your side is winning that. We got a comment on Spotify that said, I'm leaning towards audiobooks not being a book that you've read. Usually I'm multitasking when listening. I'm not able to make highlights or be able to be as fully engaged. It is still a great avenue for personal learning and growth. I just think it's a different activity from quiet, fully engaged reading. I get that. And then Annette, she emailed in and said, nothing like having a book in your hand to read. However, I have to agree with Alex, especially since the eyes get very tired as we age. I do believe that we all learn somewhat differently, and I would consider an audiobook a read. Helps when our time is scarce due to just life itself. That's true.
Annette, that's a very grounded answer, Annette. Thank you.
Yeah, that was all great responses. Thank you to everybody. If you have thoughts on this, let us know. If you have a hot take we should discuss on the podcast, we'll take your hot take and we'll talk about it here and put it out to the audience. Send us your hot take. Send it to culturebrief@denisinform.org or shoot us a message on Instagram. You can follow us or DM us at Culture Brief Podcast on Instagram. Drop us a comment on Spotify if that's where you listen. All of that to say, hot takes are fun and reach out to us. Let's jump into check-in real fast. So, Micah, I don't know if you saw last week. Alex and I touched on it briefly. Zelensky, president of Ukraine, was coming to the White House to meet with Trump about potentially getting Tomahawk missiles from the U.S. Tomahawk missiles would allow basically Ukraine to do further strikes into Russian territory. They want to aim at more energy sectors, oil plants, weapons manufacturing facilities, all of that. And Zelensky was coming to the White House to basically pitch his cause and say, we really need this. This will allow us to gain more ground back in Ukraine, all of that. And it apparently became a pretty tense meeting, and Trump kind of really shut it down and said, no, you need to just end the war. It's a little bit of change of tune from last month when he was kind of like, I think Ukraine might have a chance at getting their land back. Now, Trump doesn't seem to think that. And then he said he was going to meet with Putin this upcoming week in Hungary. That meeting, as of today, as we're recording, that meeting got canceled. So that's apparently not happening anymore. I don't know. It feels like it's all a stalemate. And Trump was basically like to Zelensky, you need to just cut it off. End the war. Give Putin and Russia the land that you've lost. Keep what you have.
Yeah, specifically the region of Donetsk, I believe is what it's called. It's like a major shipping port. So Russia's taken that over, and that's kind of a big talking point of if Ukraine is willing to cede that, is Putin going to be willing to end the war? However, what I would say is the meeting kind of being canceled out of the blue after there being some optimism. Trump didn't give the Tomahawks because he thought he was going to be meeting with Putin to potentially put some sort of agreement down. So I do wonder over this next week, if that meeting was truly canceled, I think we'll find out more information on it. And then I'm thinking maybe that does change Trump's tune, and then we do end up giving Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, but I don't even want to get into how I feel about all that. So
all I'm saying is that apparently this meeting kind of went similar to that Oval Office meeting in, I think it was February, when Trump and Zelensky kind of went at it.
It just wasn't as public. Yeah.
Well, this wasn't on camera, which is probably a good thing. Sometimes those meetings should be off camera. So yeah,
agreed.
Who knows where this is headed? We continue to pray for peace there. Also, this past weekend, everybody probably saw the images coming out of just different cities across the country of the No Kings protests.
Yeah.
They're saying 5 to 7 million people showed up around the country to these protests. We don't know the official number. Some cities, I think Chicago had like 250,000 people at theirs. Boston, Detroit, New York, LA, all those definitely, I would say, blue cities had big turnouts. It just was not as big of a thing in the South, although there were definitely demonstrations, even here in our hometown of Dallas, some of the suburbs, they had their own little protests. When I was in Maine 2 weeks ago, this was not even the official week. I was in the town of Bath, Maine, which is a tiny little town. I'm driving on the main road, and there was
the main road in Maine?
The main road in Maine, yeah. There was in Bath, Maine specifically. Just a lot of weird words here. There was a small group that was doing a No Kings protest. They had all their No Kings sign. I was like, whoa, that's just weird. It's just so random. So it's definitely a movement. And basically they're protesting, I guess, just Trump. And they're saying he has too much power and he's becoming king-like. I don't fully know everything behind that, but just, something to keep an eye on, because I think they plan to keep on doing this and hope it continues to grow in strength.
Well, I mean, I'm glad it was peaceful.
It was peaceful. Yeah, there were only 15 people across the country that were detained. I don't even know if there were any actual arrests. There was no violence.
Yeah, we're well within our constitutional rights as a people to do something like that. So I'm glad that we live in a country where that can take place and people can express themselves in that way. We just can't be crossing the line with all the rioting and looting and violence. So I'm glad that that's not really what took place overall.
Yeah, this is the way to do it. And something else to just keep an eye on is Venezuela. Apparently, the U.S. is just putting even more pressure, and they've alerted certain allies to the fact that they may start performing military action in the Caribbean and Venezuelan territory. So keep an eye on that, as there's just this war on narco-terrorists, as the Department of Defense, aka Department of War, puts it.
This is a legit war on drugs. You know how there was like a war on drugs like in the 80s and stuff and in the 90s? This is a legit war on drugs, actually, like full-scale military.
Like full-on,
war.
like our Navy and Air Force is down there. Marines are like prepping to like land. It's just insane.
Blowing up drug boats. I mean,
literally
crazy. All right. So the government is still shut down, people. And we're entering our 4th week now. So according to the Treasury Department, the economic cost could reach up to $15 billion per week in lost output if we don't open this government back up. I talk about prediction markets because I think a prediction market like Polymarket and its peers is really interesting in times like this. It gives us a good idea of really what people are saying out there, people who are connected, who get inside tips of how long this is going to last. So there was recently kind of a shift in some of the betting odds on Polymarket, but specifically right now, Polymarket is predicting a mid-November end date to this shutdown.
Oh, man.
With around 44% of traders expect the shutdown to last beyond November 16th. So meanwhile, the political stalemate continues, right, with Republicans considering a longer stopgap resolution, and Democrats are insisting on guarantees for health insurance subsidies before even reopening the government. Can we just open the government back up, please?
Yeah, no kidding. What
I
is
have some
this,
friends
Blockbuster?
who work for the government who are furloughed, and people are worried about if they're going to get back pay. If this goes on, it's gonna affect air travel. It's gonna become really inconvenient for people. Can we just open the government back up? I really have a hard time squaring this when I'm looking at Democrats and Republicans. It is just political theater, and it is costing the everyday American. Not all of us, right? Like, we're not all directly affected in that way. But $15 billion in lost output per week as a country, that should be motivating too.
This is like, if you're a business leader and your business is closed because you can't come to a deal, you would never let that happen, right? This is one business.
Yeah,
your one business
so
as the government
frustrating.
is to be open and do your services, and they need to get it done. I don't know what needs to happen. I don't know who needs to sit down in a room. I don't know if Trump needs to get involved, but somebody needs to do something.
He does need to get involved. He does need to get involved, and something's got to change because more Democrats need to vote to open up the government. So something's got to give.
This is correct.
All right. Another update. Ceasefire in the Middle East is, I would call it, coming under fire. Okay,
It's
so
fragile.
yeah. So J.D. Vance, our vice president, arrived in Israel this week aboard Air Force Two. If you didn't know, there's an Air Force One for the president, and there's an Air Force Two for the vice president. I'm sure most of our loyal Culture Brief audience knew that, but I think that's interesting. So he arrived on Air Force Two to bolster the very fragile ceasefire between Hamas and Israel and everything that's going on in the Gaza Strip to advance the next phase of the negotiations under the U.S. brokered plan, which we have detailed at length already. His agenda, Vance, while he's there, includes meeting with Bibi Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders, meeting with hostage families and U.S. envoys such as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who really get to kind of take a lot of credit for this happening in the first place. Meanwhile, the ceasefire has already been tested. So here's just a few things that have happened. After an explosion that killed 2 Israeli soldiers near Rafah, Israel responded with widespread airstrikes in Gaza, which Palestinians say killed about 40 people and injured even more than that. We are praying fervently for this peace to somehow, some way be sustained. The hand of God, an act of God, God doing only what he can do. This is kind of what we talked about before, right? You can put a ceasefire in place. You can put together this 20-point plan. I remember a couple weeks ago, I went over all the points of the 20-point plan, the pros and cons. But then what you and I talked about, Connor, was you are talking about getting people who have never gotten along for thousands of years of built-up hatred to get along. And that's just coming off these last 2 years of all-out war. So it's going to take an act of God, and that's what we're praying for, an act of God that would bring peace and lasting peace to that region so that innocent people can stop dying. I think that we can all agree that we want that to stop.
That's absolutely the prayer. So join us in praying for that. Yeah, I just really hope this holds and that the violence would just end and that there's more peace. Okay, a couple things to tune into. First and foremost, the World Series. It's here. We now know who's playing in it. It will be the Toronto Blue Jays versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Game 1 of the whole World Series is Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. This is going to be the first time in the World Series for the Blue Jays since 1993, which they won. Yep. They also won in 1992. 1993 is also the last time a Canadian team actually won the Stanley Cup in hockey. So the Blue Jays have already done it and gone back before a hockey team from Canada won a Stanley Cup. Just kind of sad. Come on, Canada. Get your stuff together.
Canada. Hey, I think Canada needs this World Series, man.
Yeah, they probably do. I don't think they... Yeah. Okay, here we go. What's your prediction? Because right now I'm thinking the Dodgers win this, right? I mean, they get this billion-dollar roster.
I think Dodgers in 6. I don't want the Dodgers to win. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily root for the Blue Jays unless I absolutely had to. But the Dodgers are like turning into the Yankees. They're kind of like the Death Star, the Darth Vader, they're just kind of turning into like the evil empire with how they just have unlimited money and spend it seemingly frivolously to build super teams. I'm definitely rooting for the Blue Jays, but I think the Dodgers are going to win.
They've got their like Darth Vader, right? Shohei Ohtani, probably this past weekend, I'm sure you watched the game, had the best baseball game in history.
Unbelievable.
He pitched how many innings? Like 6 innings. Pitched great and had 3 home runs. Just unreal. I mean, dude's a specimen. Like, he made in a lab. Just unreal. The new star of baseball. I mean, he's been around for a few years, but like he is the star and face of the sport and will be of the World Series.
Yeah, he's unbelievable. Also, the NBA is back in full swing. So your favorite NBA team will probably already have tipped off for their first game before this episode even releases. And so if you're into some National Basketball Association and you like to watch basketball, I do. Connor does not, right?
Well, I like it. I don't think the NBA is the same, so I don't watch it as much.
Yeah, right. Well, I like the NBA. So NBA's back. Tune in.
Let's go. Okay, something else. Last week, Mike and I got to join the Faith and Clarity podcast. We talked to Dr. Ryan Dennison and Dr. Mark Turman about several different things, including the AI Bible, that whole Instagram and YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Euthanasia, congressional term limits, something Micah is very passionate about. Man, he dropped his takes on congressional term limits. And then also freedom of speech. Just an all-around, man, a lot to talk about on that episode.
Yeah, it was a good episode. It was fun.
That was fun to talk with them about that stuff. So go listen to that. We'll link it in the show notes, but also you can go find the Faith and Clarity podcast. And that was going to be last week's episode. And then, guys, big news for Culture Brief here. If all goes according to plan, next week, we will be launching on YouTube our video podcast. So you will actually be able to watch this podcast. You will see Micah and I for, I guess, just if you really want to do that, you definitely can. We will be there on YouTube posting this as a full video. You can, of course, still listen just the audio version on Spotify and Apple. Actually, the video will be on Spotify too, so you can watch it there or on YouTube. Yeah, there's a whole lot of podcasts doing this. This is the new thing. You can go just sit and watch your favorite podcast. It's not just a listening device anymore. So we are making that move, hoping to launch next week. We'll give you more details as we get closer to that and on next week's episode. But that's going to be fun, Micah, right?
I am very much looking forward to it. It's going to be fun to kind of invite you guys into our process of there is so much attention to detail and there's a lot of preparation, but at the same time, hopefully it just lets you guys see even a little bit more in depth about how we interact, our facial reactions, all those things. So hopefully that's fun for everybody. Well, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Culture Brief, a Dennison Forum podcast. Check the show notes for all referenced articles, the Mailbag email address, and our Instagram page. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, and rate and review the show, and please share it with a friend, and we'll see you next Thursday.
See you next Thursday.
In a world of constant headlines and cultural noise, how can we respond, not just react? Welcome to Faith and Clarity, where we help you think biblically about the news and issues shaping our world. I'm Dr. Mark Turman. After nearly 40 years of leading churches, I've learned that theology isn't meant just for Sunday mornings or the classroom. It's for everyday life. On this show, I talk with Christians who are grounded in Scripture and real-world wisdom to explore and explain what faithfulness looks like in today's cultural confusion. From current events to discipleship, from worldview to service, our conversations combine intellectual depth with practical clarity, so you can live out your faith with compassion and conviction. Because following Jesus isn't about escaping culture, it's about engaging it with hope. So subscribe to Faith and Clarity with Dr. Mark Turman today, and let's navigate the world's fog together with biblical wisdom that transforms.